Hey everybody, hopefully all of you are keeping well. Now, the lecture today is going to look at two things. First is this last part of this table that we've been working with that we haven't filled. So I will address that. Again, I will not probably go through SPSS today. I'll not show you the methodology because you are going to be looking at it in Mark 3054. So this entire course, this entire spectrum of courses, depending upon how fast one goes, we tailor the next one accordingly. So this small little box that I won't be able to fill because we don't really have the time. So I'll address it anyway, but it's going to be dealt with in detail in Mark 3054. So that's the first thing. Just a reminder, nothing in today's presentation is going to be tested. There isn't actually too much of testable material, frankly, but the primary intention of this lecture is to let you know, number one, how we have addressed what we wanted to address in 2052. Again, when you read the syllabus, when you read the course outline, pretty much most of it goes whoosh. That's true for me too. So I want to provide a small little framework, if you want to call it that, in terms of what we have been able to address or what we should have been able to address. The methods that we have been able to cover, I've kind of fallen slightly short of where I would have wanted to, but again, across the entire spectrum of these courses, you will get every single unit that you're meant to. So that's the first thing that I'm going to look at. The next thing that I'm going to look at is the four courses that we offer as what's known as the Marketing Analytics stream. Again, this is known as a stream internally. It doesn't mean that you can actually go ahead and claim a bachelor's in marketing analytics. No, you can't. It's just that you have the ability to say that you've been through a marketing analytics stream in your own vita. And obviously you should have the skills that go along with that, which is what the intention of these four courses is to provide you with some exposure to the marketing analytics stream. Again, you can go ahead and do a master's in marketing analytics if you want to. We are going to be looking at it in more detail out there. There you are going to be programming a lot more than you will in here. In here, the focus is primarily on implementation rather than anything else. Okay, so let's start off first with what I call basically, a wrap up, and putting that last part. I'm going to give it a name in a minute or two. That last part, which is not being addressed as of right now. And again, I'll come back to the boxes. I'll give you proper boxes today, lovely little diagrams and everything. But for one last time, I want to go through the boxes just to remind you where we were. I'm not going to look at the previous boxes right now. What I'm going to look at is the last box, which is the box of 2 or more than 2 continuous variables. Now, I've been getting a lot of emails, and I thought I had nipped this in the bud when I talked about this in week 2 as to what's is a continuous variable different from a ratio variable? Is it different from a scale variable? The answer is all of them are different. We, however, in this particular course, assume that any ordinal variable, which is 5 or more levels, can be assumed to be a continuous variable. So a ratio variable is included in a continuous variable, a scale variable is included in a continuous variable. As long as you have 5 or more levels, you can assume this to be a continuous variable. So this is the last case that we were dealing with, 2 or more than 2 continuous variables. When we looked at 2 continuous variables, we had at our disposal 2 different tests, if you want to call them that. The first was correlation, and the second was univariate regression. So correlation and univariate regression. From there, we moved to 3 or more continuous variables, and we said, okay, what we can do is we can run what's known as a multiple regression. So if we have more than 3 continuous variables, we can run a multiple regression. Into this scenario, we threw in that wrench of adding a categorical variable, nominal or ordinal, but the specific situation in here was it had only 2 levels, 0 or 1. So 0 or 1 being the only 2 levels. If it was 0 and 1, it could be male or female. It could be young or old. It could be educated versus uneducated. You could make any groups of 2, and you could run what was known as a constrained regression. This was known as a constrained regression. So constrained regression was when we had 2 levels of an independent variable that was thrown into the equation in its raw form. That's the most important part. It's thrown in its raw form. That implies you're not really doing anything to that variable. Gender is thrown in straight. If you create a new variable called income, which has 2 levels, rich and poor, throw that in. That's all. So it's thrown in its raw form, and this is called a constrained regression. Again, constrained regression is not something that you're going to hear in the statistical world, but it's used a lot in the market research world, in the consultancy world. Okay? So that was a constrained regression. Now, we didn't change this much, but we said, okay, there's probably a better way of doing it if we have enough data. If we have enough data. If we don't have enough data, then obviously we can't do this, which is we run a separate regression for segment 1, which is let's say the young people, and a separate regression for regression 2, for a segment 2, which is old people. So young, old, rich, poor, male, female. So we ran 2 separate regressions. Why was this good? This was good because it allowed the slopes to vary as well as the intercept to vary. So if we have males and females, we are no longer looking at parallel lines where only the intercept is different. What case is that? That's a constrained regression. In a constrained regression, the slopes of both the segments is going to be the same. In the unconstrained regression, we are allowing the slopes to vary as well as the intercept to vary. Both of them vary. If they vary, then you have what is known as an unconstrained regression. Unconstrained regression. So we have a constrained regression, we have an unconstrained regression. Let's take it one step further, and this is probably something that you might be able to utilize in your project, which is an unconstrained regression is going to work even if, okay, here's the interesting part, it's going to work even if you have more than 2 levels of the categorical variable. If your categorical variable has more than 2 levels, doesn't make any difference as to whether if it's a nominal variable or a ordinal variable. In either of those scenarios, you can still run an unconstrained regression, which means I have 3 segments, I can still run an unconstrained regression. 4 segments, still run an unconstrained regression. So, in our data set, I would advise you to do this as a homework. You can run a separate regression for the Japanese cars. You can run a separate regression for the American cars and a separate regression for the European cars. So unconstrained with 3 separate levels. Unconstrained is good because you can run it no matter the number of segments. Constrained, however, you can't do that. Constrained regression with 2 levels of the variable, that's easy to do. So that's an example that we did last time, which was just throw in this variable as an independent variable. In constrained regression, if your levels are greater than 2, you can't run a constrained regression. So let me give you an example with the data set that we have. Okay, I'm going to go back to the types of cars. Okay. What are the types of cars? You have Japanese, we have European, and we have American. 3 types of cars. I can run a constrained regression with overall satisfaction is equal to current car attributes, a separate regression for Japanese cars, a separate regression for European cars, and a separate regression for American cars. See that? So 3 separate regressions. I can run all the 3 of them separately. Not a problem. If I had a 4th car, which was, let's say, an Asian car, I can do that too. If I had a 5th car category, which is Australian cars, let's assume there is a car that's Australian, there you go. As many as I want without any problems. But if I wanted to run a constrained regression, I can't do that. Why can't I do that? The reason I can't do that is because you are assuming that these have an order. Which is not always true. In this case, for example, there is no order. If you were running these by races, by the ethnicity of your respondents, then again, that's not true. So when you have to run a constrained regression and the number of possible answers that you want is done through separate regressions, which was this, an unconstrained regression, you are fine. But when you run the constrained regression, more than 2 levels, that's not something that can be done. I don't think that came out too well because I used the wrong term in there. So let me do that again. If you have an independent variable which has more than 2 levels and is a categorical variable, you can run as many unconstrained regressions as possible. To run a constrained regression, you have to use a methodology which is known as dummy variable regression. There's an E in there. What is a dummy variable regression? You will do this in 3054. A dummy variable regression is a constrained regression where your categorical variable has more than 2 levels. Okay? It's a specific type of exercise where you are going to use a separate marker for each and every category. For each and every category, you have a specific marker. How do you create that marker? You have to create a matrix, which is called a dummy variable matrix. So you will get to know about that in 3054. There is, however, an interesting case, which is why I'm even spending time on this. Again, always try and run an unconstrained regression wherever you can. But suppose you have to run a constrained regression, you should look at dummy variable regression when the number of levels of the independent variable is greater than 2. Here is the scenario which lets you go away from dummy variable regressions. Spending 2 seconds on this, understand why. So we have a variable, let's call that v1. We have another variable, let's call that v2. The first one is a nominal variable. The second one is a ordinal variable. Both of these are categorical variables, right? Both of these are categorical variables. The methodology that needs to be used for these is going to show a different pattern, and I'll show you a table later on during today's presentation, and you can have a look at that. Let us assume the first one is race, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it. Okay. The second one is an ordinal variable, so let's call that age. Race is nominal, age is ordinal. Hopefully you know by now why that is the case. So let's go with race. Let's suppose there are 2 races. Let's go with Asians and Caucasians. Age, let's go with less than 15, and just for right now, greater than 15. So I have just divided my sample into 2 age groups, 15 and 15. Now, the scenario right now is that we are trying to run a constrained regression. Why? Because there's a categorical variable involved. I can obviously run unconstrained regressions without any problems. So what is it that I'm going to run in here? This is going to be a constrained regression, but all I need to do is throw in race as an independent variable. If the number of levels in race is 2, what am I going to do? I'm going to run a simple constrained regression. What about age? I can run a simple constrained regression. Now obviously it's going to be better off running unconstrained, but we can do constrained if we want to. Now let's add a third race to this. Asians, Caucasians, Hispanics. And let's add a third category to this, 15 to 20 and greater than 30. Sorry, greater than 20. What do? I still run a constrained regression with dummy variables. I still run a constrained regression with dummy variables. So 3 levels instead of 2. All that's changing is that instead of throwing in the independent variable in its raw form, I'm going to be running dummy variables. Again, dummy variables is not something that I'm looking at. I'm trying to show you a very specific scenario where this whole thing about dummy variables disappears. It's interesting because it makes our job so much easier. We'll talk about that. So moving from 3 to 4, Asians, Caucasians, Hispanics. Let's do Pacific Islanders, and in here 20 to 25 and greater than 25. Nothing changes. Still dummy variables. Constraint regression, still dummy variables. Right? Nothing has changed. And now I'm going to add a fifth level. What did I forget? Sorry. Blacks, last category. 5 categories. Age, let's add one more, 25 to 30 and greater than 30. In this case, I'm still going to use a cluster-wise regression with dependent variables. In this case, and here is why, it's better to have ordinal variables than normal variables. If the number of levels in an ordinal variable is 5 or greater, what is the assumption that I can make? The assumption that I can make is that this variable is no longer ordinal but it's continuous. Which means I no longer have a categorical variable. This categorical variable, which was an ordinal variable, is now a continuous variable. So all I've done is added one more continuous variable to the regression, which means now I can run multiple regression. So see this? When the number of levels is 3 or 4 for an ordinal variable, I am relegated to, unfortunately, running a dummy variable regression. If it's 2, all I need to do is throw that variable in as an independent variable. If it's 5 or more, then it becomes a simple multiple regression. So for ordinal variables, this is a very small area. This is a very small set of scenarios where you have to run a dummy variable regression. For all others, you can either run a multiple regression or you can go and do a simple constraint regression. For nominal variables, on the other hand, no matter the number of levels, you can never assume it to be continuous, which means you always need to run a constraint regression as a dummy variable regression. Okay? So that's a very, very lovely scenario where you are doing your level best to move to multiple regression, which number one is a lot better, a lot more flexible, and number two does not need to push you into the scenario where you have to run a dummy variable regression. Why do you want to avoid a dummy variable regression? Managers don't understand it. That's probably the easiest answer. You can learn it. I can learn it. Managers, however, have a tougher time understanding it. So we try and stay away as much as possible from dummy variable regression. It is, however, a fact of life that there are times when you do face dummy variable regression, and that's why you will be introduced to that in Mark 3054. Okay, moving on from there. Sorry. We are going to look at, number one, I'm going to try and put the whole course into perspective in terms of what you should have done, what you shouldn't, some things that I need to remind you of. So I'll look at that and then finally talk to you about what I call the road ahead. Okay, so let's start off. So first thing that I wanted to remind you of was peer evaluation. Your peer evaluation, the link is already on Moodle, so if you want to go ahead and evaluate your group mates, a few things that I wanted to bring to your attention. First, you don't need to fill that up. You do not need to fill this up. Fill this up if and only if you think one person did not, or two people did not contribute at all. as far as it staying open goes, I've said it can be submitted till the end of week 10. I will probably not be evaluating, stopping this till you have submitted your final project. So probably it's going to be Monday. So on the day of your final exam, that's when I'll stop it. And whatever you want to, no matter how many times you want to enter your data, that's going to be fine. Only your final evaluations will be counted. I'll try my assumption is going to be that everybody's worked, and if there are multiple people who have commented about your performance, only then will I bring this into action. Otherwise, I have no intentions of looking at peer evaluation. Again, at least 2 people have to give you some kind of a bad grade for me to be able to bring down your grades in any manner or form. Okay, let's start off first with what the course learning objectives were. I think they're called course learning outcomes. Let's start off first with what the course learning outcomes were for this semester. Again, a lot of it was we were given the flexibility of changing these CLOs. I didn't change anything because I thought I would be able to focus on most of those, which I think I have. So there are 4 different CLOs that we had looked at. These were knowledge, which I spent some time with you. About 30% of the course I think I spent on that, which was explaining when and how, what technique should be used. And that's primarily the box that we have been playing with since day 1. Well, week 2. These will continue, and you have learned probably a third of all the tests you should know before you can call yourself a data scientist. And obviously there is no end to it, but we will give you some more exposure in 3054, 3090, and 3085. Okay? All 3 of those will probably take you further in that direction. We'll move from analysis to analytics. The difference between those 2 is what people look at in those courses. You've been exposed to SPSS. 3054 will expose you a little bit more, and obviously my assumption is that all of you are familiar with Excel. We did touch a little bit of Excel in our course, but very little. In addition to SPSS, you'll be exposed to, now SPSS is something of which you have a working knowledge. In 3054 you will be exposed a little bit to R, a little bit to SAS, to the best of my knowledge. In 3090, you will look at Python a little bit. You'll also look at advanced versions of SPSS. What you're working with is IBM SPSS statistics. You will be looking at SPSS Modeler, which will help you in doing Twitter analyses, Facebook analyses, and so on. Third, and this I think was the first time you have done it, and unfortunately nobody can teach this, which is interpreting and giving that interpretation in managerial words. That's steps 3 and 4. Running those tests is really easy. I think I told you in the first lecture that a lot of this course is going to be monkey see, monkey do, which is click, click, click. That part is easy. That part you can sit on YouTube and learn. What is more important is looking at the situation, figuring out what test to run. That's number 1. Once you have the results from the test, understand what those results mean. I even, in spite of the fact that I'm working in data science for such a long time, there are new methods that I look at, and when I look at those methods, I follow them blindly and I know exactly, what's happening. But when it comes to interpretation is very, very specific to the context that you are working with. Very specific. And that's not something that can be taught. I can probably tell you this star up here means it's different. Okay, but what is different? In our case, it was one attribute different from another. Okay. You might not always face a situation like that. For you, it might be something else. If you're looking at gift giving, the amount of gift giving is not as important as the managerial worth of the person who is giving the gift, the monetary worth of the person who is giving the gift. So that's going to be very, very different. So that interpretation is something that has to come from here. I can give you some exposure to it, but being able to adjust to the output, that's something that you will learn, and that's something you will learn as you go along this entire journey. And the most difficult part of it all is the managerial application, where you have to take this interpretation and change it into a P, one of the 4 Ps, being tweaked by the manager. If the manager cannot tweak a P, or any of the 4 Ps, then your interpretation, your test, everything was useless. One of those P's has to be moved so that your consumers like your product better. Okay. So these are the 4 things, and hopefully the first 2 I can quantify. The second 2, it's something abstract that you take along with yourself. Obviously, in your final exam, I try and test that, but it's again very, very specific to the data that you have. You will need to remember that. Okay. The next thing that we look at is what are known as graduate attributes. I think there were 5 in this class that I had to address. Part of it is something that's dictated by the business school, so I'll look at those too. So those are critical thinking and problem solving, which happen to be happening in both. First, at the individual level, and second, at the level of the group. That's happened in the project. It will happen in the final exam, which is the final practicum. So everything is going to happen in there. Second was actually writing. That's also happening in both those cases. Group writing is more of an abstract concept, but individual writing, of course, is something that we will be evaluating. Teamwork is a part of the course. Again, one of the most important things at the business school. So we hope that everybody worked well, but if they haven't, then there is the peer evaluation, of course. Your SDP framework, our focus will always be to, give me 1 second, will be to change one of the 4 Ps, which is your positioning, to better target your market given the segments that you have. And the final thing that you're looking at, hopefully this semester more than ever before, is professional skills. Are you self-directed? That's all. That's all that my intention was. That's all that I had been told to address, and I hope I have been able to address this. How did we do it? So the first thing was going through the entire market research 10-11 process. This is a very important part. I know it seems relatively abstract. You think you haven't gone through this, although I have had a lecture about it, with us specifically focusing on that. Well, not number 11, but the first 10, but more focus on the last 3. It's something that you will need to imbibe further. We have not looked at collecting data in this particular class, not survey design, although I do ask you in your final project how you could have made the survey better. We have not looked at sample design, but we have spent a lot of time on that. You have spent a lot of time on that, trying to come up with aims. What is it that we are trying to answer? Okay. How does this translate into something with a manager that a manager can do? And that's coming from in here. 3, 4, 5, and 6. We did not do this, given that the semester is condensed to 10 weeks. We are staying away from that. So 1, 2, 9, and 10. Those were the most important things that we looked at. Unconsciously, we always go through it. It's just that I gave it a little bit of a conscious structure, which hopefully is going to help you as you go into 3054, 3090, and 3085. Okay. The second thing, the first thing was, of course, the market research process. The second thing that we looked at was the actual methodologies. I do not like calling it a toolbox, but it's certainly the first screwdriver that you are using. So 4 screwdrivers, if you want to call it that, across 4 types of analyses, which were the descriptive analyses, inferential and differential analyses, crosstabs and chi-square, factor analysis and cluster analysis is something that you will be touching in Mark 3090. And finally, regression. We will obviously take all of these to higher levels. Probably you're not going to see this ever in your life. Probably you will see a lot of these which hide more information than they provide. This are the foundations of all that you are going to be doing over the next few years, over the next few semesters, won't call it years. Okay. So the choice of technique is dependent upon, always, a broad question. A broad question that helps the manager in changing one of the 4 P's. If you can't change 4 P's, your aim is worthless, and it's got to be very specific. I've received a lot of questions. Do demographics help how much you like Nike? That's too vague. That's way too vague. Make it more specific. Okay. A certain demographic, which might be income, how much does it affect your liking for Nike? Now, this is something which a consumer can do, which a manager can do something about. If a certain demographic likes me more, I advertise more to them. Alternatively, if a certain demographic does not like me, I can advertise more to them and make them like me. So, advertising might be a reason to, or a tool to be able to, which is 4th P, which is promotion, which will help people buy me, which will help people like me. And then what test needs to be run, which hopefully most of you have done a good enough job. I'll probably know next week. Have done a good enough job in terms of in the project. In terms of tying this with the aim. I've talked to quite a few people about their projects, and most of you have done this part pretty well. So this has not been a problem. The problem has been identifying an aim, which is something which a manager can directly use. I did mention, and this is across the course of the entire semester, just because you started off with an aim doesn't mean we stick with that aim. Because when you start working with the data, you learn new things that you didn't think were going to happen. So having a post-facto hypothesis, having a post-facto finding, there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Please go ahead and do it. In psychology, that's a no-no. In statistics, that's a no-no. In business, all that we care about is, can this translate into money? If it comes later, while I'm working with the data, absolutely no problems. Please go ahead and do that. Okay. P-value of 0.054 is just something that's been handed down to us through the ages. Okay. P equal to 0.06 might be good enough. P equal to 0.07 might be good enough. Okay. Sometimes you need to go and collect additional data. When you looked at the data, new things happened. You thought, this is an interesting question that we have not looked at. If that happens, go back and collect more data. This is what I'm looking for in that project component, which looks at how can you improve. Improving is the most important part in here. Sitting on top of something and not doing anything, That's something which is not the way a manager should work. Okay. So you decided upon a technique. Well, actually, no, you haven't really decided upon a technique. You decided upon an aim. What you need to do next is basically go through multiple steps. Figure out the number of variables that you're using, what type of data is it. This is actually, believe it or not, this is the boxes that we've been looking at. I've listed this down in here. What I want to do is go through those boxes with you one more time. Believe it or not, this slide that you see is taking you to the boxes that we have been working with. Okay? So let's go through those one at a time. The boxes one more time, one last time. Again, this part, keep it with you for at least the next 2 or 3 semesters. You might be using this in 3054. You will be using this in 3090, and you might be using a little bit of this in even 3085. Anyway, so let's start off with when you are working with just one variable. You don't really have too much that you can do. You have means, medians, modes. That's it. That's all that you can play around with. When you have 2 variables, both of which are categorical, what are you left with? You only have one single test. To remind you what it's called the chi-square test. Why is the chi-square test horrible? The chi-square test is horrible because it tells you that a relationship exists, but it does not tell you about the direction of the relationship. Okay. Now, let's look at what happens when you're looking at one categorical and one continuous variable. First time I'm breaking this up into 2. Ordinal and nominal. We've not done that, but I wanted to bring this to your attention one final time. So if you have one segment of people, one question, you have a simple t-test. It's a test of means. If you have 2 questions for one segment, it's a paired t-test or a repeated t-test, whatever you want to call it. More than 2, repeated measures ANOVA. Okay. You've been through this throughout the semester, so hopefully this is ingrained. If you have one question that you're analyzing, but you have 2 groups of people,
2051太难了。
you have independent t-tests.
对，2052
More than 2?
能过了。
One way ANOVA. Notice, however, now here is a difference. What is the difference? The difference is for ordinal variables, as soon as the number of variables is greater than or equal to 5, you can assume it to be a continuous variable. Hence, it's a univariate regression. Now I can run a univariate regression. For nominal variables, that's not an option. For ordinal variables, you can move on to univariate regression. Finally, something that I showed you at the beginning of today's lecture. There you go. More than 2 variables. All are continuous. Happy days. Multiple regression. But once you introduce one categorical variable, then the story becomes a little complicated. For nominal variables, you have 2 levels. You have binary regression. What is a binary regression? I'm calling this a binary regression just to make sure that you know that it's different. A binary regression is when you can throw an independent variable in as a variable into the regression equation. This can happen only when the categorical variable is binary in nature, which means it's either a 0 or a 1. All other scenarios you can't. For all other scenarios, you have to run a dummy variable regression. For nominal variables, always, again, dummy variable is something you'll look at in 3054. For ordinal variables, however, if the number of levels is 5 or greater, you can assume this ordinal variable to be continuous and run the regression as a multiple regression. What's missing in here, it doesn't go into the boxes, is that you always have the option in both these cases of running what? Not a constrained, but an unconstrained regression for each and every level separately. Okay. So let's go through a bird's eye view. A bird's eye view in here is, in terms of the analysis processes, the analysis process is not linear. Just because you started off thinking that you're going to do something, that's not going to happen. Okay. So don't think that just because I started off with the analyses that males are different from females, that's not what I'm going to end up with. If you end up with that, it might be because you started off with a good hypothesis. It might also be because you are not a very flexible person. You're not willing to learn new things. You have not explored the data enough. Could be any of those. You need to, while you are working with the analyses, change your stance because your data tells you something else. Or you look at the data and find something interesting. Whatever it is, it doesn't make a difference as to why you come up with new questions. The fact that you are coming up with new questions, that needs to be addressed with new techniques. Okay. You can't start off and go straight to advanced techniques. That's probably not a problem right now, but once you come to 3090, you might want to start off with factor analysis. No, you don't. Go back and look at something very simple as means. Look at simple t-tests, and then based on what you see in there, you go to advanced techniques. Okay? Advanced techniques are not an end-all be-all. It's not all about numbers. It's more about your logical thought process. Okay? Data analysis is a very lucrative career, and if you decide to go through this, you'll be going through 4 courses in the marketing stream only. So the 4 courses are 2052, which you've already been through. You know about that. That's taught by me. Second, introduction to big data. You are either going to be taught by Songting or Lubomir. Lubomir is a new person who we have hired from UTS. He's an excellent lecturer, so I don't think you'll have any problems with him. So he might be teaching that too. So we don't know for certain. I don't know for certain. 3090 is again me. So that's you will be divided into groups. You'll compete with each other. 3085, as of right now, we have a temporary teacher. So if you take it next term, it's probably going to be a temporary teacher. But we should have somebody who will be willing to address that, hopefully soon. Now, why focus on marketing analytics? Again, you have to have that acumen. You have to like numbers, even a little bit to go in there. The simple answer is the reason why you want to get into marketing analytics is that. There you go. Probably the fastest growing profession, and this is data from 3 years back with the COVID thing striking, with people working from home. This is going to grow even faster. If you look at the percentage growth, it tells you everything that there is to it. Yeah. So this is something that you should keep at the back of your head. So let me go through these 4 courses in terms of what they're supposed to look at in a little bit more detail. So the first thing was, people join marketing because they want to do something soft. They don't like numbers. And we know this because we've been teaching marketing for a long time, that students get into marketing because they do not like mathematics. And we come back and tell you, no, you need to work with maths and stats. No, we don't. Most of the data scientists do not have an advanced degree in maths and stats. They know basic stats, and after that, the methodology is irrelevant. What is relevant? Sorry about that, give me 1 second. What is relevant is the fact that, sorry about that, that came through, is the fact that you should be able to run the test. That's something which is monkey see, monkey do, as I said. That's number one. And number two is that you should be able to take this to the next level and understand what the results mean. Okay. You need to know what the results mean. Once you know what the results mean, what can the manager take away? Okay. So what can the manager take away? So you need to know that too. The last part, unfortunately, is not something that can be taught. Pretty much everything else can be taught, but the last part, changing your interpretation. Interpretation is going to be different across cases. Sorry about that. I should have to, let me just sign out of this. They can't be taught. Sorry. They can't be taught. This is something that you will need to get used to yourself. Okay. 3054, you will have a refresher. You are going to be looking at customer lifetime value, some advanced segmentation, and you do look a little bit at text analytics and big data. Okay. But the focus at the end of the day is probably still going to be what can I tell the manager? Okay. I'm not 100% sure about text analytics. To the best of my knowledge, they are moving out of that for right now. But again, these courses keep on changing based on what is being taught where. So this just gives you a bird's eye view. In 3090, you're not going to be running any tests. You get exposed to a little bit of R, you get a little bit of Python, you get IBM SPSS Modeler, but you're not going to be actually running any tests. What you're going to be doing is looking at the results of the tests and making managerial decisions. You should be making managerial decisions. It's a small class. It's I think capped at 40. This semester it was capped at 40, and I had I think 37 students to start off with. 2 of them left because of COVID, but it's a but again, this is not a class where you can land up in the lecture in week 2 and decide that you are going to be on top of everything. It's very difficult for that to happen in this particular class. Okay. Production decisions, advertising decisions, place decisions, promotion decisions, everything is something that you need to decide as a group and make your final recommendations. And it's not just you who's doing it, it's other people in other groups who are also going to be playing around with them, and you compete against each other. 3085 is primarily a web analytics course where you will get some exposure to Python and R, or you might get some exposure to something like, let's say, Tableau. I don't know what the software is going to be. The software is immaterial. Analytics based on what people do when they visit a website, what kind of advertising do you need to expose people to, where on a web page should advertising be, if I'm going to Kohl's, what kind of email should I receive with what kinds of coupons, and so on. That's what 3085 is going to be looking at. If you take that next year, it's possible that I teach that, but again, I have no idea about that either. Okay. All right, I'll stop now. So that concludes our course. If you have any questions about your project, about your finals, please let me know. Again, a reminder that I cannot talk to you about the finals data set. Other than that, everything else we can have a chat about. Okay? And just because we are getting done with the semester doesn't mean that you can't have a chat with me. A lot of you have been chatting with me about stuff other than just the course. Please feel free to continue to do so. I'm on sabbatical for the rest of the year, but I'll always be available by email, so have a chat with me. And all the best for your final exams, your project, and the rest of your degree. Take care. Bye and keep safe.